300 years of blood, 300 years of kings dying before their time, 300 years of a curse that ate through the valorous bloodline like fire through dry wood, leaving nothing but ash and regret in its wake. Seraphina knew all of this. She had learned it in whispers through dungeon walls, in the muttered prayers of guards who forgot she could hear, in the cold silence of chains that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Knowledge was the only thing they could not take from her. So she collected it piece by piece, building a map of the world above from fragments of conversation and careless words spoken by men who thought a prisoner was not worth noticing. The dungeon beneath Blackstone Palace smelled of old stone and older regrets. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, counting seconds that had long stopped mattering. Iron shackles bit into her wrists, silver threaded through the metal to weaken any wolf who wore them. The silver burned constantly, a low fire that never quite faded, eating away at her strength drop by drop. Most Omegas would have died within months of such imprisonment. The silver poisoning alone should have killed her before the first year ended. Seraphina had survived 3 years, not because she was strong. She had stopped believing in her own strength the night she watched her husband transform into something monstrous, the night his teeth tore into her shoulder and his eyes held no recognition of the woman he had loved. She survived because she refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking. Every morning she opened her eyes was an act of defiance against those who had condemned her. Every breath she drew was a rebellion against the fate they had chosen for her. The mate killer, the cursed Omega, the woman who ripped out her husband's throat during the blood rite ceremony. Lies. All of it lies. But truth had stopped mattering the moment they dragged her from Kalen's body, his blood still warm on her hands, his last breath still echoing in her ears. She had tried to explain, had screamed the truth until her throat went raw. But no one wanted to hear. No one wanted to believe that their beloved Alpha had been murdered by something far darker than an Omega's jealousy. It was easier to blame her. Simpler, cleaner. A monster they could chain in the darkness and forget about. So they had. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Not the shuffling gait of the old guard who brought her meals, a man named Brennan who sometimes slipped her extra bread when no one was watching. These footsteps were different, deliberate, military, multiple sets of boots striking stone in perfect rhythm, the sound of men who marched with purpose. Seraphina raised her head slowly. Her dark hair fell across one eye, tangled and unwashed, but her gaze remained steady. 3 years of darkness had taught her many things: how to read footsteps by their weight and cadence, how to gauge threat by the length of a stride, how to find strength in the places where weakness should have consumed her, how to survive when survival itself seemed like the cruelest punishment of all. 2 soldiers appeared at her cell door. The older one bore scars across his face like a map of every battle he had survived. His left eye was milky white, blinded long ago by a wound that had nearly killed him. The younger one still had soft eyes, the kind that believed serving the Alpha King was an honor rather than a sentence. He could not have been more than 20, young enough to still have ideals. The older guard produced a key and unlocked the cell door. The hinges screamed in protest, rust flaking away like dried blood. He spoke first. His voice carried the roughness of a man who had stopped expecting answers long ago. "On your feet, the king summons you." Seraphina laughed. The sound scraped through her throat like broken glass, harsh and unexpected. After 3 years, the king suddenly wanted to see her face. She wondered what had changed. What piece of information had finally reached his ears that made her worth summoning from the depths of his own dungeon? What political calculation had shifted to make a forgotten prisoner suddenly valuable? She stood slowly, her joints protesting after so long on cold stone. Her legs trembled beneath her, muscles weakened by years of confinement, but she forced them to hold. She would not crawl before these men, would not let them see how close to breaking she truly was. The younger guard looked away when her prison shift fell open slightly, revealing the silver scar on her collarbone, the mark that had appeared the night Kalen died, the mark she had tried to burn away with wolfsbane and failed. It seemed to pulse sometimes, especially when the moon was full, as if something alive slept beneath her skin, waiting for a moment she could not name. They chained her hands in front of her body, adding new shackles to the ones she already wore. The weight of the metal pulled at her shoulders, but she straightened her spine and met the older guard's eyes without flinching. "Move," he grunted, gesturing toward the corridor. They led her through winding corridors that climbed ever upward. The dungeons were deep, carved into the bedrock beneath the palace centuries ago. Each level they ascended brought new sensations. The air changed first. The damp chill of the dungeon gave way to coolness, then to warmth, to the scent of cedar smoke and beeswax candles, to the rich perfume of power that permeated every stone of Blackstone Palace. The deeper they went into the palace proper, the stronger the presence became. Dominance hung in the air like a living thing, pressing against her skin, making the wolf inside her stir with instincts she had thought long dead. Lesser wolves would have bowed their heads, bared their throats, submitted to the overwhelming authority that radiated from these walls. Seraphina kept her chin raised. They passed servants who froze at the sight of her, nobles who drew back against the walls, their faces twisting with recognition and disgust. She heard the whispers following her like shadows. "The mate killer. She is alive. Why would the king want to see her now? What does this mean?" She ignored them all. The great doors of the throne hall stood 3 times her height, carved from black ashwood and bound in silver runes that pulsed faintly with ancient power. The wood itself was said to come from the first forest, cut from trees that had stood since before wolves learned to walk upright. The runes were older still, written in a language that predated spoken words. Guards flanked both sides of the doors, their eyes following her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The mate killer, brought before the king at last. What spectacle awaited them today? The doors groaned open. Light flooded her vision. Not the golden glow of torches, but something colder, sharper. Moonlight streaming through a massive glass dome overhead, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The dome itself was a marvel of engineering, hundreds of glass panels fitted together so seamlessly that they appeared to be a single curved surface. It must have cost a fortune to build. It must cost a fortune to maintain. But such was the wealth of the Valeris bloodline, accumulated over 3 centuries of conquest and taxation. Hundreds of wolves filled the hall, nobles and warriors dressed in ceremonial silks, their faces turned toward her with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. Ladies in gowns of midnight blue and forest green, lords in tunics embroidered with their family crests, generals in dress armor polished to a mirror shine, all of them watching, all of them judging. But Seraphina barely noticed them. Her eyes found the throne. Black obsidian carved into the shape of a howling wolf, its jaws open to the sky, its body forming the seat where the Alpha King rested. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail of the wolf's form rendered in perfect stone. Its eyes were set with pale moonstones that seemed to glow with inner light. Its claws gripped the base of the throne as if ready to spring forward and devour anyone who approached without permission. And on that throne sat a man who needed no crown to announce his power, Theron Valoris. He was not what she had expected. The stories painted him as a monster, a cold-blooded tyrant who had killed his own brother to claim the throne. They spoke of his cruelty, his ruthlessness, his willingness to sacrifice anyone and anything to maintain his grip on power. They called him the Wolf of Winter, cold and merciless as the storms that swept down from the northern mountains. But the man before her looked tired, not weak, never weak. His presence filled the room like a physical force, pressing against every corner, demanding acknowledgement. But tired in the way of those who have carried weight for too long and learned to hide how heavy it has become. Tired in the way of men who have stopped sleeping because their dreams offer no peace. His hair was black as raven wings, swept back from a face carved with sharp planes and hard angles. Silver touched his temples, more than should have been there for a man of 42 years, a sign of the curse eating him from within, stealing his life one strand at a time. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and unreadable, fixed on her with an intensity that made her wolf stir for the first time in 3 years. The wolf she had thought dead. The wolf that had gone silent the night Kaelin's teeth tore into her shoulder and his blood spilled across her hands. It moved now deep inside her, recognizing something in the man on the throne, something it wanted, something it feared. Seraphina pushed the sensation down and kept walking. The guards forced her to her knees at the base of the throne. Her chains clattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the sudden silence that had fallen over the hall. Every eye was fixed on her. Every breath was held. A man stood to the king's right, older, perhaps 55, with scars that spoke of 3 decades of warfare. His body was still powerful despite his age, thick with muscle earned through endless hours of training. His eyes were the color of burnt amber, watchful and calculating. General Magnus, she realized, the king's beta and most trusted advisor, the man who had served the Valeris bloodline since before Theron was born. His hand rested on the pommel of his sword, and his gaze never left her face. To the king's left stood another figure, ancient, bent over a gnarled staff carved from pale wood, with eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. His skin was paper-thin, stretched over bones that seemed too fragile to support even his diminished weight. But there was power in him still, power that hummed beneath the surface like a sleeping beast. Elder Corvinus, the keeper of royal secrets, the man who had served 3 generations of Valeris kings and buried them all. Magnus spoke first. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This is the one, Your Majesty, the Omega who killed Alpha Kalen of the northern border. She has been held in your dungeons for 3 years awaiting judgment." The words hung in the air like an accusation, like a sentence already passed. Theron said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on Seraphina, studying her the way a general might study a map before battle, looking for weaknesses, looking for strengths, looking for truths hidden beneath surface lies. His expression revealed nothing. His posture gave nothing away. He was a wall of stone wrapped in flesh, impenetrable and patient. Seraphina met his stare without flinching. The silence stretched between them, growing heavier with each passing moment. The court began to shift uncomfortably. Whispers started at the edges of the room and spread inward like ripples in a pond. But neither Seraphina nor Theron looked away. Finally he spoke. "They say you tore out your husband's throat." His voice was deeper than she expected. Quiet, but with an edge that could cut through steel. It was not a voice that needed to shout to be heard. It was a voice that commanded attention simply by existing. "They say you killed him during the blood rite ceremony while the moon watched and the pack stood witness." "They say many things, Your Majesty." Seraphina was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. 3 years of silence, and now words flowed from her lips as if they had been waiting for this moment. "They also say you have perhaps 3 years left to live before the curse claims you. Is that true as well?" The hall erupted in gasps. Magnus's hand tightened on his sword, knuckles going white. Several nobles stepped back as if expecting violence. Even Corvinus looked up sharply, his ancient eyes widening with something that might have been surprise or respect. But Theron did not react. His expression remained as immovable as the obsidian beneath him. Only his eyes changed, sharpening with something that was not anger, something closer to interest. "You are either very brave or very foolish." Seraphina tilted her head slightly. "I have spent 3 years in your dungeon, Majesty. 3 years in chains, 3 years in darkness. I have nothing left to lose. That makes me more dangerous than anyone else in this room." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not how prisoners were supposed to behave. This was not how an Omega addressed an Alpha King. The natural order of things demanded submission, demanded fear, demanded groveling pleas for mercy. Seraphina offered none of these things. Something flickered in Theron's eyes, the ghost of something that might have been approval. "Leave us." The command was quiet, but it struck the room like a thunderclap. Nobles froze in shock. Magnus opened his mouth as if to protest. Even Corvinus shifted his weight, uncertain. "Your Majesty," Magnus began, "I said leave us." There was no anger in Theron's voice, only certainty, only the absolute expectation of obedience. "All of you, now!" The hall emptied in minutes. Nobles fled as if the floor had caught fire. Guards marched out with military precision. Even Magnus and Corvinus departed, though both cast long glances over their shoulders as they went. The great doors closed behind them with a boom that echoed through the sudden emptiness. Seraphina remained on her knees, her chains pooling on the marble before her. Now she was truly alone with the Alpha King. Now there was no crowd to witness, no court to perform for. Whatever came next would happen without observers. Theron rose from his throne. The movement was slow, deliberate. the kind of motion that demanded attention simply by existing. He descended the steps one at a time, his boots clicking against stone, until he stood before her. Up close, he was impossibly tall, his presence wrapped around her like a physical force, pressing against her senses until she could barely breathe. The scent of him filled her lungs with every inhale, cedar and storm and something darker beneath it, something ancient, something that called to the wolf she had thought dead and buried. Her mark burned beneath her collarbone, a sharp, sudden pain that made her gasp. Theron's eyes dropped to her chest, to the place where silver light now pulsed faintly through the thin fabric of her shift. So it is true. His voice had dropped to something almost intimate, a tone meant for her ears alone. You bear the mark. Serafina forced herself to breathe, to think, to push past the sudden chaos in her blood. What do you know about my mark? Theron crouched before her, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the exhaustion he hid behind his mask of authority. Close enough that his scent made her dizzy with sensations she did not want and could not name. I know that it appeared the night your husband died. I know that it matches the sigil of my bloodline in every detail. And I know that Elder Corvinus believes you may be the key to ending a curse that has plagued my family for 300 years. Serafina stared at him. The words made no sense. How could she be connected to a curse that belonged to the Valeris bloodline? She was no one. An Omega from a minor pack, married to a border alpha of no particular importance. There was nothing special about her blood, nothing remarkable about her lineage. Was there? I do not understand. Neither do I, Theron admitted, but I intend to find out, and you are going to help me. Why would I help you? Because if Corvinus is right, your life is tied to mine whether either of us likes it or not. The curse that is killing me may already be killing you. The mark on your chest is not a coincidence, it is a connection. And if we do not discover what it means, we may both be dead before the year ends. Serafina absorbed this in silence. 3 years in the dungeon had taught her patience, had taught her to think before reacting, to consider before committing. The king was offering her something, information, purpose, possibly freedom, but nothing came without a price, especially not from men who sat on thrones. What exactly are you proposing? Theron stood and stepped back, giving her space to breathe for the first time since he approached. One night in the moon chamber with me, the sacred space where every valorous king faces the curse for the first time, where secrets of blood and bone are revealed to those willing to pay the price. If we survive until dawn and the curse does not destroy us both, you walk free. All charges against you will be dropped. Your husband's lands will be returned to you. Your name will be cleared before the entire realm. The silence that followed was absolute. Serafina stared at him. The moon chamber was legend. The sacred heart of Blackstone Palace, where kings confronted their doom, and many of them died. No outsider had ever been permitted inside. No one outside the royal bloodline had ever survived a night within its walls. And if I refuse, then you return to your cell. Theron's voice held no threat, only fact. And we both die alone, you in darkness, me on a throne that grows colder with every passing day. I am not asking you to trust me. I am not asking you to believe in prophecies or ancient magic or the words of men long dead. I am asking you to take a chance on something neither of us understands. The hall waited. The moonlight streaming through the dome above seemed to pulse in rhythm with the mark on her chest. Serafina could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, demanding a choice. She thought of Kalin, of the night he died, of the questions that had haunted her for 3 years. Who had done this to him? Who had twisted him into a monster? Who was responsible for the destruction of everything she had loved? The king claimed to have answers, or at least the means to find them. I will agree to your bargain. Her voice did not waver. But not for freedom. Freedom means nothing to me anymore. I want the truth about what happened to my husband, all of it. Whatever your family knows, whatever secrets your bloodline has buried, I want them laid bare. Theron studied her for a long moment. His gray eyes searched her face, looking for deception, looking for weakness, looking for the cracks in her resolve. He found none. You shall have it. He turned and called for his guards. The great doors opened once more, and servants rushed in with new clothes, clean water, everything needed to prepare a prisoner for ritual. Tonight, Theron announced, we test the prophecy. The moon chamber laid at the heart of Blackstone Palace, hidden behind doors that had not opened for a generation. High Priestess Isolde led the way, her silver robes whispering against the obsidian floor. The corridors grew narrower as they descended, the walls pressing closer, the air growing thick with the weight of ages. Runes carved into every surface began to glow as Seraphina passed, silver light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. With the mark on her chest, with something ancient that recognized her blood, even if she did not recognize it herself. "The king takes a great risk." Isolde's voice was barely above a whisper. "The moon chamber has not been opened since his father died within its walls. Many believe it should never be opened again." Seraphina absorbed this information without reacting. Another piece of the puzzle. Another secret the Valeris family had buried along with their dead. "And yet he opens it for me, a prisoner, an Omega accused of murder." Isolde glanced back at her, and something like sympathy flickered in her ageless eyes. "Perhaps he sees something in you that others do not. Or perhaps he is simply desperate enough to grasp at any hope, no matter how unlikely." The doors to the chamber appeared before them, black ashwood bound in silver, identical to the throne room doors, but somehow older, more worn by centuries of hands pressed against their surface, more saturated with the blood and tears of those who had passed through them, seeking answers they may not have wanted to find. Isolde pressed her palm against the center of the doors. The runes flared bright, silver giving way to gold, then to white, then to a color Seraphina had no name for. The doors swung inward with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself. The chamber beyond stole her breath, vast and circular, dominated by a domed ceiling of pure glass that opened to the night sky. The moon hung directly overhead, impossibly large, impossibly close, its light pouring down in a cascade of silver that illuminated every corner of the space. The floor was covered in concentric circles of runes, spiraling inward toward a raised platform at the center. A hearth burned nearby with silver fire that gave off no heat, its flames dancing in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost alive. And standing before that hearth, stripped of his royal armor, was Theron. He wore only a simple black tunic and dark trousers, his feet bare against the runed floor. Without the trappings of kingship, he looked somehow more dangerous, more real. The scars on his forearms caught the moonlight, remnants of battles fought and survived. The silver at his temples gleamed like frost. He turned as she entered. "Leave us!" Isolde bowed and retreated without a word. The doors closed behind her with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. Seraphina stood at the edge of the rune circle, her chains removed, but her wrists still raw and bleeding from their touch. The air in the chamber was thick with power. She could feel it pressing against her skin, humming in her bones, vibrating in the very marrow of her being. It recognized her. It knew her. And it had been waiting. "You look afraid." Theron's voice held no mockery, only observation, only the simple statement of fact from a man who had learned to read people the way scholars read books. "I am terrified." She saw no point in lying. He would sense the deception anyway. "But I have learned that fear is not the same as weakness. Fear keeps you alive. It sharpens the senses and quickens the blood. Weakness gets you killed. Fear I can work with." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, but something close to it. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. He crossed to a marble basin near the hearth, filled with water that shimmered faintly with crushed moonstone and powdered silver. He washed his hands in it, and when he lifted them, they glowed briefly before the light faded into his skin. "Do you know the history of this room?" Seraphina shook her head. 300 years ago, my ancestor Aldrich Valeris I stood in this very spot with a woman he claimed as his mate. His voice was quiet, measured, as if each word cost him something to speak. She did not want him. She fought him with everything she had. And in his arrogance, his certainty that power entitled him to whatever he desired, he used dark magic to force the bond between them, to bind her to him against her will. He turned to face her, and the moonlight caught his eyes, turning them to mirrors of silver. She cursed him with her dying breath, cursed his bloodline to never know true love, cursed every Valeris king to die young, consumed by the very power they wielded, eaten alive by the magic that should have been their birthright. For 300 years, that curse has held true without exception. My father died at 43, his father at 41, his father before him at 38. I am 42 years old, and I can feel the curse eating me from within every single day, every hour, every breath. Serafina listened without interrupting. This was more than she had expected. More honesty than any king should offer a prisoner, more vulnerability than any alpha should reveal to a stranger. Elder Corvinus believes you are descended from her, Theron continued. From Alara, the woman Aldrich violated. Your mark appeared the night your husband died, yes? The night the curse claimed another victim? The realization hit her like a physical blow, a connection she had never considered, a thread of fate stretching back through centuries. Kaelin was connected to this somehow. Theron nodded slowly. We do not know the specifics yet, but the mark you bear is identical to the sigil of my bloodline. It should not exist on anyone outside the royal family. The fact that it does means one of two things. Either you are bound to the curse in ways we do not understand, or you are bound to its solution. He paused. Tonight we find out which. He drew a small blade from his belt. Ancient, curved, its edge etched with runes that seemed to move when she looked at them directly. The metal was dark, almost black, and it hummed with a frequency she could feel in her teeth. Blood for blood. It is the only way to access the truth the chamber holds, the only way to open the door that has been sealed since Alara spoke her final words. Serafina watched as he drew the blade across his palm. Dark blood welled up, spilling across his skin like liquid night. He did not flinch, did not hesitate. He had done this before, she realized, many times. Seeking answers the chamber refused to give. He held the knife out to her. She hesitated, not from fear of pain. She had endured worse than a cut palm in the darkness of her cell. But there was something final about this moment, something that could not be undone once begun. Once her blood mixed with his, once the runes drank from both their veins, there would be no going back. Whatever connection existed between them would be forged permanently. Whatever fate awaited them would become unavoidable. She took the blade. The metal was cold against her fingers, colder than it should have been. Alive with something that was not quite magic and not quite malice, something patient, something old. She cut. The pain was sharp and clean, a line of fire across her palm. Blood welled up instantly, darker than she expected, and she watched it pool in the hollow of her hand. Theron extended his hand toward her. Serafina looked at him, at the blood on his palm, at the curse written in his eyes, at the weight of 300 years pressing down on shoulders that had never known peace. She reached out. She took his hand. The moment their blood touched, the world exploded. Light erupted from the floor. The runes blazed white, then gold, then a silver so bright it burned even through closed eyelids. Energy shot up her arm, racing through her veins like liquid fire, like lightning trapped in flesh. She gasped, tried to pull away, but Theron's grip held firm. His fingers locked with hers. His blood flowed into her wound and hers into his. Endure it. His voice cut through the chaos, distant but certain. It will pass. The pain peaked, white-hot agony that consumed everything, that burned away thought and fear and memory and left only raw sensation. And then everything shifted. She was no longer in the moon chamber. She was somewhere else, somewhen else. The same room, but different. The runes were fresh, newly carved, their edges still sharp and clean. The hearth burned with ordinary fire, orange and gold, and two figures stood at its center, a man and a woman. The man wore a crown of black iron. His eyes burned with ambition, with possession, with the absolute certainty that everything in the world belonged to him if he was strong enough to take it. Aldrich Valeris, the first of his bloodline, the foundation of a dynasty built on blood and force and the broken will of those too weak to resist him. The woman was chained at the wrists, just as Serafina had been. Dark hair, pale skin, eyes that held no submission despite everything that had been done to her. Only hatred, only the cold fury of someone who would rather die than yield, who had chosen death over surrender and wanted her enemy to know it. "You will be mine," Aldrich's voice echoed through time, arrogant and assured. "Whether you choose it or not. The bond is already formed. Your will is meaningless now." The woman spat at his feet. "Then you will never know what you could have had." Her voice was steady despite the chains, despite the blood on her wrists, despite the knowledge of what was about to happen to her. "I curse your blood, Aldrich Valeris. I curse every son of your line to search for what you stole from me and never find it. You wanted power without love. Now that is all your descendants will ever have. power that consumes them, loneliness that destroys them. They will die young, die bitter, die wondering why they could never fill the emptiness you created." Aldrich laughed, a cruel, confident sound. "I do not need love, I need obedience, and I will have that from you soon enough." The woman smiled then, a terrible smile, the smile of someone who knew something he did not, who had already won a victory he could not yet see. "And when the moon rises red and two bloods meet willingly, when a daughter of my line chooses to bind herself to a son of yours without force or coercion, only then will the curse end. But you will never see it. None of your children will see it for generations upon generations, because you have ensured that no one will ever trust a valorous king enough to choose them freely." The vision shattered like glass beneath a hammer. Seraphina fell backward, gasping for air. Her hand burned where Theron's blood had mixed with hers. Her mark blazed beneath her collarbone, visible through her thin shift, pulsing with silver light in rhythm with her racing heart. Theron knelt beside her, his own breath ragged, his mask of composure cracked for the first time since she had met him. His mark had emerged as well, glowing at his throat, identical to hers in every line and curve. "You saw it." His voice was hoarse, raw. "You saw the beginning." Seraphina nodded, unable to speak. The images still burned in her mind. Alara's face, Aldrich's cruelty, the curse born of rape and violence and a woman's dying vengeance. The woman! Theron's eyes met hers, gray meeting amber in the silver light. Her name was Alara. And if Corvinus is right, you carry her blood. You are her descendant, her heir in ways that matter more than land or title. The implications crashed over her like a wave. "That is why Kaelin died." Seraphina's voice came out broken, shattered. "That is why the curse found him. He carried her bloodline too, thinner than mine, but still there, still enough." Theron nodded slowly. "A weaker strain than yours, but enough for the curse to recognize, for it to act. My father discovered it somehow. He must have tracked the bloodline through generations, and when he found Kaelin, he acted. Your father killed my husband. It was not a question." Theron did not look away, did not flinch, did not offer excuses or justifications. "I do not know the specifics. I was not told. But I know what my father was capable of. If he saw Kaelin as a threat to the bloodline, as a potential key to breaking the curse in a way he could not control, he would have eliminated that threat without hesitation or remorse." Seraphina sat with the weight of this truth. 3 years of questions, 3 years of not knowing, 3 years of wondering who had destroyed her life and why. Now the answers spread before her like a wound that would never fully heal. Theron rose and walked to the window that overlooked the mountains beyond. His back was rigid, his hands clasped behind him. The moonlight painted him in shades of silver and shadow, and she could see his shoulders trembling slightly. Not with cold, with something else, something he was fighting to control. "I will not apologize for my father." His voice was quiet but clear. "There is no apology adequate for what he did, no words that can undo the harm or bring back what was taken. But I can offer you something he never would have given." "What?" "The truth. All of it. Whatever you want to know. Whatever secrets this palace holds, whatever records my family has buried, you will have access to everything. And when this is over, whatever we discover, you decide what happens next. If you want to walk away, I will let you. If you want revenge against my bloodline, I will not stop you from seeking it." He turned to face her. "What I will not do is force you into anything. Whatever happens between us, whatever the curse demands, whatever the moon requires, it must be your choice, freely given. That is the only way to break what Aldrich created. That is the only path forward that does not end with both of us destroyed." Seraphina stared at him. In her entire life, no one with power had ever offered her a choice. Her father had arranged her marriage to Kaelin. Kaelin, for all his kindness, had expected her to accept her role as his mate without question. And the courts that condemned her had never asked for her side of the story. Now here stood a king, son of the man who had murdered her husband, offering her what no one else ever had: autonomy, agency, the right to determine her own fate. "Why?" she had to ask. "Why does it matter to you what I choose?" Theron was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years. "Because I have spent my entire life watching my father, my grandfather, every king of my bloodline destroy the people around them in their desperate attempt to escape the curse. They used force. They used manipulation. They used every tool of power available to them, and every single one of them failed. Every single one of them died alone, consumed by the very darkness they tried to control. He took a step toward her. I am tired of being the heir to that legacy, tired of being the monster my ancestors made me. If the curse claims me, so be it. But I will not become what they were. I will not force anyone to save me. If there is a way out, it must be walked willingly by both parties, or it is not a way out at all. Seraphina rose slowly to her feet. Her mark still pulsed faintly, echoing his. You are not what I expected. His mouth curved slightly, the ghost of something that might have been a smile in another life. Neither are you. They stood in silence as the moon climbed higher, its light washing through the glass dome above them. The energy of the chamber hummed between them, ancient and patient, waiting for what would come next. Tell me about him, Theron said after a long pause. Your husband, what was he like? The question surprised her. No one had asked about Kalen in 3 years. To the world, he was just another victim, another name in a long list. He was kind, she heard herself say, too kind for the world we lived in. He believed that strength meant protecting those weaker than yourself, not dominating them. He used to say that any wolf could bare its teeth, but only a true alpha could choose not to bite. And you loved him? Yes. Her voice did not waver. I loved him, and I watched him die. I watched him become something he was not. And when he attacked me, the last thing I saw in his eyes was recognition. Just for a moment. He knew what he was doing, and he was grateful that I stopped him. Theron absorbed this in silence. Then he crossed to the hearth and took an iron poker, stirring the silver flames. My brother did not attack me, he said quietly. I attacked him. My father ordered me to prove my worth by killing my only sibling. I was 15 years old. I have never forgiven myself. Seraphina stared at his back. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Why are you telling me this? Because you trusted me with your pain. It seemed only fair that I trust you with mine. He set down the poker and turned. We are both survivors of what this bloodline has done. Perhaps that is why the curse connected us. Perhaps we were always meant to face it together. Seraphina did not know how to respond. She only knew that something had shifted between them. Not attraction. Not yet. But understanding. Recognition. The acknowledgement of two people who had walked through fire and emerged scarred but breathing. The dawn will come soon, Theron said. You should rest. Tomorrow we begin searching for the full truth of what my father did. And the curse? We will face it, together, if you are willing. Seraphina looked at him for a long moment, at the silver in his hair, at the weight on his shoulders, at the king who had chosen to be honest when lies would have been easier. I am willing, Theron nodded once. Then we have a beginning. Outside the glass dome, the stars began to fade as the first pale light of dawn crept over the mountains. The night had ended. The trial had passed, but Seraphina knew this was only the first step of a much longer journey. And far away, in the shadows of the palace, General Magnus stood alone before a narrow window. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword. His eyes watched the moon fade into morning. He had served the Valerys bloodline for 30 years, had buried 3 kings, had given everything he was to a cause that seemed cursed from its inception. And now, for the first time, there was hope that the curse might end, that Theron might live, that the woman from the dungeon might hold the key to breaking what had seemed unbreakable. Magnus should have been happy. He was not, because if the curse ended, if Theron lived to old age, if he found love with the Omega woman and produced heirs who would rule for generations to come, what would become of Magnus? What would become of the man who had sacrificed everything for a bloodline that no longer needed him? The messenger from the south had arrived 3 nights ago. Lord Aldrich Thornwood's offer had been clear. Help ensure the curse remained unbroken, and Magnus would have power beyond anything he had ever known. He had not answered yet, but as the dawn broke over Blackstone Palace, as somewhere inside its walls a king and an Omega began to forge an alliance that might change everything, General Magnus made his decision. He would wait, watch, and when the moment came, he would do what he had always done. Whatever was necessary to survive. The first chapter of the Blood Moon Covenant had been written, but the story was far from over. The War Council assembled at dawn. Seraphina watched from the shadows of an alcove as the most powerful wolves in the Northern Kingdom filed into the stone chamber. Generals in battle-worn armor, their faces etched with the weight of campaigns fought and comrades buried. Lords in fine tunics embroidered with their house sigils, each symbol representing generations of loyalty to the Valeries crown. Advisors carrying scrolls and maps, and the burden of decisions that would determine whether thousands lived or died in the weeks to come. The chamber itself was ancient, carved from the bedrock beneath Blackstone Palace during the reign of the second Valeris king. Tapestries depicting famous battles hung from walls blackened by centuries of torch smoke. A massive oak table dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred by generations of use, marked with the rings of countless goblets and the gouges of daggers slammed down in anger or frustration. Theron sat at the head of this table, his posture rigid with authority. He had not slept. Seraphina could see it in the tension around his eyes, in the slight hollowing of his cheeks, in the way his fingers drummed silently against the wood, as if counting down to something only he could anticipate. But his voice when he spoke carried no trace of exhaustion, only authority, only the absolute certainty of a man who had been making impossible choices since before he was old enough to understand their consequences. Report. General Magnus stepped forward from his position near the door. He moved with the economy of motion that came from decades of combat, every gesture purposeful, nothing wasted. His scarred face was grim beneath the flickering torchlight, the milky white of his blinded eye catching the flames and reflecting them back like a dead star. Our scouts confirmed the numbers overnight, Your Majesty. Lord Aldrich Thornwood has assembled 20,000 troops along the southern border. Cavalry, infantry, siege weapons, and what appears to be a full complement of war mages. More arrive daily from the coastal cities and the inland territories that owe him fealty. A murmur ran through the assembled lords. 20,000 was not an army of intimidation. It was not a show of force designed to extract concessions at a negotiating table. 20,000 was an army of conquest, large enough to sweep aside everything in its path. Lord Commander Vance, a weathered man of 50 with salt and pepper hair and the permanent squint of someone who had spent too many years at sea watching for storms, spread a detailed map across the table. The parchment was covered in notations and marks, troop positions and supply lines traced in different colored inks. They have positioned their main force here. He pointed to a valley that cut through the mountains like a wound in the earth. The Thornwood Pass. It is the only route large enough to move an army of that size with their equipment. If they march, and they will march, they will reach Blackstone within 3 weeks, perhaps less if they push their men hard. Unless we stop them at the pass, Magnus said, his voice flat and professional. The terrain favors defense. The valley narrows to less than 100 yards at several points. We could hold them there indefinitely with half their numbers, provided we have adequate supplies and our forces remain committed. Theron studied the map in silence. His eyes moved across the terrain features, the rivers and forests and choke points, calculating distances and casualties with the cold precision of a born tactician. Seraphina watched him process information, watched the way his mind worked behind those storm-gray eyes, and understood for the first time why men followed him, despite the curse that hung over his bloodline like a death sentence. He was not merely a king by birth. He was a king by nature, a man who saw patterns where others saw chaos, who found paths where others saw only obstacles. "What does Aldrich want?" The question came from Lady Mira, the keeper of the royal treasury. She was 45, sharp-featured, with eyes that missed nothing and a mind that could calculate the cost of war down to the last copper coin. Her presence at war councils was unusual, but not unprecedented. Theron valued her perspective, her ability to see beyond the immediate clash of swords to the longer game of resources and economics. "He has not made demands," Magnus replied, his scarred face twisting slightly. "Not formally. Our diplomatic channels remain open, but he has sent no envoys, issued no ultimatums. However, our sources in the south report that he believes the curse keeps the northern kingdom weak, that each generation of Valeries kings die before they can consolidate true power or build lasting alliances. He has been patient for 25 years, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now he believes that moment has come." Theron's voice was flat, emotionless, but Seraphina could see the tension in his shoulders, because of her. Every eye in the room turned toward the alcove where Seraphina stood. She did not flinch, did not lower her gaze, did not try to make herself smaller or less visible. 3 years in a dungeon had burned away whatever capacity she once had for shame. She had survived worse than the stares of nobles. She had survived worse than whispered accusations and pointed fingers. The woman carries Alara's bloodline. Elder Corvinus spoke from his seat near the fire, his ancient voice carrying despite its frailty. His gnarled fingers gripped his staff, the pale wood gleaming in the firelight like bone. If Lord Aldrich has learned this, and we must assume he has, then he knows what it means. The curse that has protected his ambitions for 3 centuries may finally be vulnerable. He will not allow it to be broken. Protected his ambitions. Seraphina stepped forward into the light, letting them see her clearly. You speak as if the curse has been useful to him. Corvinus turned his rheumy eyes toward her, and she saw something in them that might have been approval. Indeed it has, child. Think on it. Every valorous king dies young, usually before producing more than 1 or 2 heirs. Every generation brings instability, power struggles, opportunities for ambitious men to expand their influence while the crown is weak. Lord Aldrich has built his entire dominion on the certainty that the North will never have a ruler who lives long enough to challenge him. If Theron breaks the curse, if he lives to see 60 or 70 or even longer, the balance of power shifts permanently. Everything Aldrich has built becomes vulnerable. So I am a threat to him, Seraphina said quietly. Not because of what I am, but because of what I represent. You are the key to a door he wants to remain locked forever. Corvinus agreed. He will do anything, sacrifice anything, to ensure it stays that way. Theron rose from his chair. The movement silenced every whisper, stilled every shifting foot. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, the presence of an alpha in his prime, undimmed by the curse that gnawed at his bones. Lord Aldrich can want whatever he pleases. His voice carried the cold edge of steel being drawn from a sheath. I will not sacrifice this woman to preserve his comfort or his ambitions. Nor will I start a war I do not need to fight. Magnus frowned. Your Majesty, if we do not act decisively, they will interpret it as weakness. The other kingdoms are watching. Our own lords are watching. Any sign that we fear the southern armies will embolden not just Aldrich, but every rival who has ever dreamed of testing our borders. Then let them think what they will. Theron met his general's eyes without flinching, and something passed between them that Seraphina could not quite read. I have fought wars, Magnus. I know what they cost. I have held dying men in my arms and listened to them call for mothers they would never see again. I will not spend lives on pride or appearance. Reinforce the border, double the patrols, ensure our supply lines are secure and our defensive positions are prepared. But no one crosses into southern territory without my explicit command. And if they cross into ours? Then we defend what is ours with everything we have. But we do not seek battle, not yet, not until we know more. The council exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the response they had expected. The Wolf of Winter was known for decisive action, for meeting threats with overwhelming force, for striking first and hard before enemies could organize. This caution was something new, something that made them nervous. Only Seraphina understood. Theron was buying time to explore the connection between them, time to find another way to break the curse, time to determine if there was a path forward that did not require the blood of thousands. She wondered if such a path existed. She suspected it did not. The council dispersed an hour later, their faces tight with worry and unspoken concerns. Seraphina remained in the alcove until the last of them had gone, watching Theron stare at the map as if it held answers he could not find. The torches had burned low, casting long shadows across his face. You surprised them. He looked up at her voice. His eyes were tired, dark circles visible beneath them, but something in them sharpened when they met hers. Did I surprise you? She considered the question carefully before answering. No. I think I am beginning to understand you. That makes one of us. A ghost of something that might have been humor flickered across his features. Some days I do not recognize the man in the mirror. He rolled the map and set it aside, then gestured toward a door at the far end of the chamber. Come, there is something you need to see. He led her through corridors she had not walked before, past guards who stood at attention, and servants who pressed themselves against walls to let them pass. The palace was a labyrinth, she realized. layers upon layers of stone built over centuries, each generation adding new wings and towers and secrets. A man could spend a lifetime here and never see every room, never discover every hidden passage. They descended a narrow staircase into the depths of the palace, past the level where her dungeon had been, into older stone that predated the current structure by hundreds of years. The air grew cold and stale, carrying the scent of ancient paper and forgotten knowledge. Dust motes floated in the light of the torch Theron carried, dancing like tiny spirits disturbed from their rest. "The Royal Archives," Theron said as they emerged into a vast underground chamber. "Every document the Valerie's family has accumulated for 3 centuries. Birth records, death records, treaties, declarations of war, personal correspondence, everything. Corvinus has spent his entire life cataloging it, but even he admits he has not read a fraction of what is stored here." Torches flickered to life as they entered, illuminating row after row of shelves stretching into darkness. Scrolls and books and bound ledgers filled every available space, a mountain of words waiting to give up their secrets. The smell of old paper and leather bindings filled Seraphina's nose, the accumulated weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Elder Corvinus was already there, bent over a table covered in yellowed parchment. He looked up as they approached, and something in his expression made Seraphina's blood run cold. "You found something?" It was not a question. Corvinus nodded slowly, his ancient face grave. "I have been searching for 3 days, ever since I realized who she was and what her presence might mean." He gestured toward a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and faded with age, the spine threatening to disintegrate at a touch. "This is the personal diary of Aldrich Valeris I. It was sealed after his death on the direct order of his son, with explicit instructions that it never be opened. The seal was magical as well as physical. I broke both an hour ago." Theron's jaw tightened. "What does it say?" Corvinus pushed the journal toward Seraphina. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly, whether from age or from the weight of what he had read. She could not tell. Perhaps she should read it herself. "The words concern her bloodline more than yours." Seraphina took the journal with hands that trembled slightly. The leather was brittle beneath her fingers, threatening to crumble at her touch. She opened it carefully, turning pages covered in faded ink until she found the passages Corvinus had marked with slips of ribbon. The handwriting was elegant but cramped, the words of a man accustomed to recording his thoughts with brutal efficiency, a man who had never expected anyone else to read what he wrote. "Day 15 of the Black Wolf Moon. She still refuses me. I have tried everything a king can try, gifts of gold and jewels that would make lesser women weep with joy. Promises of power and position, a seat at my side as queen of the greatest kingdom in the realm. Threats against her family, her village, everything she holds dear. Nothing moves her. She looks at me with those eyes full of hatred and tells me that a fated bond means nothing if it is not chosen freely. She says I could force her body, but never her heart. She says I will die alone no matter what I do to her." Seraphina turned the page. "Day 30 of the Black Wolf Moon. The witch Morvain has offered a solution, a ritual that will bind her to me regardless of her will. It requires blood and pain and a piece of her soul that she will never recover. It is forbidden magic, the kind that stains everyone it touches. I know it is wrong. I know it violates every law of our kind, every principle I claim to uphold. But I am the king. The laws exist to serve me, not to constrain me. Tomorrow night, when the moon reaches its peak, I will take what is mine. I will make her understand that my will cannot be denied." Her hands were shaking now. She forced herself to continue. "Day 1 of the blood moon. The ritual is complete. She is mine now, in body, if not in spirit. The bond has been forced into existence, a chain of magic binding her life to mine." But something went wrong. As the binding took hold, she spoke words I did not understand. Old words, ancient words, words that predated our language and our kingdoms, words of power. And then she smiled at me with blood on her lips and said that I had doomed my entire bloodline. She said the curse would pass from father to son until a daughter of her blood chose to forgive a son of mine. She said that would never happen because she would ensure her descendants knew what I had done. They would carry the memory of my crime in their very blood, and they would never forgive. Then she died. Not from the ritual. She simply stopped breathing, as if she chose death rather than life as my mate. I have won everything and lost everything in the same moment. I have the power I sought, and it tastes like ash. Serafina closed the journal. The silence in the archive was absolute. He knew. She said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He knew exactly what he had done. He recorded it in his own hand, every detail, every justification. Theron took the journal and read the passages himself. His face revealed nothing, the mask of the king firmly in place, but she could see his knuckles whitening where he gripped the leather. 300 years. His voice was barely above a whisper. 300 years of suffering because one man could not accept rejection. Corvinus cleared his throat. There is more, I am afraid. I cross-referenced the names in the diary with our genealogical records, searching for any connection to the present day. What I found was disturbing. Alara was not just a random woman Aldrich became obsessed with. She was the daughter of a rival Alpha, a powerful lord whose territory bordered the early Valeris kingdom. She had been promised in marriage to another, a young Alpha named Theron, coincidentally. Serafina's eyes widened. When Aldrich saw her at a gathering of nobles and felt the pull of the fated bond, Corvinus continued. He demanded she break her engagement and come to him willingly. She refused. She said the bond was a suggestion, not a command, and that she had already given her heart to another. Aldrich responded by challenging her intended to single combat. The fight was brief. Aldrich was the stronger wolf, the more experienced warrior. He killed the young man in front of her and then took her by force. Serafina felt sick. The room seemed to spin around her. The man she was supposed to marry. Corvinus continued, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. His bloodline survived through a younger brother who escaped Aldrich's subsequent purge. That bloodline continued for 300 years, weakening with each generation, but never dying out entirely. Eventually it produced a minor alpha in the northern territories, an alpha named Kalen. The world tilted beneath Serafina's feet. Kalen was descended from Alara's intended, the man Aldrich murdered to claim her. Yes. Corvinus's voice was gentle now, the voice of a man delivering news he wished he did not have to share. When you married Kalen, two branches of the same tragedy came together. Both of you carried blood connected to the original curse. The magic recognized this. It stirred from its slumber, and Theron's father sensed it. Serafina's voice was hollow, empty. He realized what Kalen represented. Theron set the journal down. His hands were steady, but his eyes burned with something she could not name. My father was obsessed with breaking the curse by any means necessary. He spent his entire reign searching for solutions, consulting witches and seers, traveling to distant lands in search of ancient knowledge. When he discovered Kalen, he must have seen him as a threat, a wild element he could not control, a potential key to breaking the curse in a way that did not involve him or his legacy. So he eliminated him. How? Serafina demanded, her voice cracking. How did he kill my husband? Corvinus hesitated, his ancient face creased with reluctance. There are records of a ritual, a way to trigger the curse's defensive mechanisms, to turn anyone with connected blood into a vessel for its destructive power. He turned Kalen into a monster. Serafina's hands clenched into fists so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. He used the curse itself to murder an innocent man. Theron's voice was quiet. Yes, he did. Serafina stood frozen, the weight of 300 years pressing down on her shoulders. Everything she had believed about Kalen's death, every nightmare she had endured, every moment of guilt and rage and grief, all of it traced back to this room, to these words, to the sins of men long dead who still reached from their graves to destroy the living. She turned to Theron. Your father murdered my husband. Your ancestor raped and killed my ancestor. Your bloodline has been destroying mine since before either of us was born. Theron met her gaze without flinching. Yes. And now you ask me to help you break the curse, to bind myself to you willingly, to give the son of my enemies exactly what the daughter of their victim swore would never be given. Yes. Give me one reason why I should. The question hung in the air between them, sharp as a blade. Theron reached into his belt and drew a knife. Not the ritual blade from the moon chamber, but an ordinary weapon, steel and leather, the kind of knife a man might use to cut rope or bread or the throat of an enemy who got too close. He reversed it and held it out to her, hilt first. Because I'm giving you a choice. Serafina stared at the knife, at his hand, steady and unwavering, at his face, stripped of masks and pretense, offering her something no Valeris had ever offered a member of her bloodline. The power to decide. My father took everything from you. Theron's voice was low, intimate, meant for her ears alone. Your husband, your freedom, your future. I cannot give those things back. I cannot undo what was done. But I can give you this moment, this choice. Take the knife. Use it if you want. My blood is the blood of the man who destroyed your life. If you believe my death will bring you peace, then take it. I will not stop you. Seraphina's fingers closed around the hilt. The steel was cold against her palm. The edge was sharp enough to slice through flesh without effort. One quick motion and she could open his throat. End the Valeris line forever. Give Alara the vengeance she had been denied for 3 centuries. She thought of Kaelin, of his gentle hands and kind eyes, of the way he had held her on cold nights and told her stories of the ancestors until she fell asleep, of the life they had planned together, the children they had dreamed of, the future that had been stolen from them both. She thought of Theron, of the weight he carried, of the curse eating him alive, of the man who stood before her offering his life because he believed she deserved the right to take it. She lowered the knife. Killing you will not bring Kaelin back. Her voice was steady, though it cost her everything to keep it so. And despite everything your bloodline has done, you are not your father. You are not your ancestor. The sins of dead men do not belong to you. Theron's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. Something loosened, like a rope that had been pulled too tight, finally given slack. Then what do you want? Seraphina set the knife on the table between them. I want what I have always wanted, the truth. And I want to know if there is a way to end this that does not require more blood. Corvinus spoke from the shadows. There may be, but it will require another ritual, another night in the moon chamber. What ritual? The old man's eyes were grave. The curse specified that it would end when a daughter of Alara's line chose to forgive a son of Aldrich's. But forgiveness alone is not enough. The magic requires proof of sincerity, proof that the choice is genuine and not merely words spoken to achieve an end. What kind of proof? Sacrifice. Corvinus's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The willingness to die for each other, not in words alone, but in truth. One of you must stand at death's door, and the other must choose to take their place. Only then will the curse believe that the cycle has truly ended. Seraphina absorbed this in silence. She looked at Theron. He looked back at her. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The price of breaking the curse had just become terrifyingly clear. The days that followed were filled with preparation and waiting. Corvinus and High Priestess Isolde consulted ancient texts, searching for the precise ritual requirements. Theron attended to the endless demands of a kingdom preparing for possible war. And Seraphina found herself in an unexpected role, neither prisoner nor guest, but something between, walking the halls of Blackstone Palace with guards who no longer watched her with suspicion. She spent hours in the royal library, reading everything she could find about the curse and about Alara. She trained in the practice yards, rebuilding the skills Kaelin had taught her. And in the quiet moments, she found herself thinking about Theron, about the man he was beneath the crown. On the third night, Corvinus summoned them to the moon chamber. The second ritual took place beneath a sky heavy with clouds that parted only for the moon itself. Seraphina stood once again in the moon chamber, the runes beneath her feet pulsing with silver light, the moon overhead burning through the glass dome like an eye that refused to blink. She wore a simple white dress this time, her feet bare against the cold stone, her hair unbound and flowing down her back like dark water. Theron stood across from her, similarly stripped of ceremony. No armor, no crown, just a man in black facing a woman in white, both of them carrying wounds that no one else could see. High Priestess Isolde had explained the ritual in precise clinical terms. The moon chamber would open a door to the spirit realm, allowing those connected to the curse to communicate with its source. If Alara's spirit could be reached, if she could be convinced that the cycle was ready to end, she might reveal the path forward. Or she might destroy them both. The curse was born of rage and violation. Isolde had warned them, her ageless face grave. The spirit at its heart may not be interested in reconciliation. She may want only to see the Valeris line extinguished completely. You are gambling with forces older than your kingdoms, older than memory itself. Seraphina had accepted the risk. Theron had simply nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. Now they stood in the silver light, waiting for something neither of them could name. Theron extended his hand. Are you ready? Serafina looked at his palm, still scarred from their first ritual, looked at the mark glowing faintly at his throat, looked at the man who had become something she had not expected, not a friend, not yet, but not an enemy either. Something else, something that defied the categories she had spent her life believing in. She took his hand. The chamber exploded with light. This time the transition was different. Not the violent wrenching of the first ritual, but a slow dissolving, as if reality itself was melting away to reveal something beneath. The stone walls faded. The glass dome vanished. The torches and hearth and runes all disappeared into a silver mist that wrapped around them like a living thing. When the mist cleared, they stood in a forest. Ancient trees rose around them, their trunks wider than houses, their branches intertwined high overhead to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. Silver light filtered through the leaves, casting everything in shades of gray and white and shadow. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft sound of their breathing. "Where are we?" Serafina whispered. "The spirit realm." Theron's voice was hushed, reverent, the place between life and death, the forest where souls wander before they move on to whatever comes next. She felt it then, the presence watching them from among the trees, eyes that had seen centuries pass, a consciousness older than the stones beneath their feet. A figure emerged from the shadows. She was beautiful in the way that storms are beautiful. Dark hair flowing like water around a face carved from moonlight and sorrow, eyes that held the accumulated pain of 300 years, a dress of silver that moved without wind. "Elara." She stopped 10 paces away and regarded them with an expression that held neither warmth nor hostility. Only patience, only the endless waiting of the dead. "So." Her voice echoed through the forest like the tolling of bells. "After all these centuries, a daughter of my blood finally stands before me, and beside her, a son of my violator." Serafina stepped forward. "Grandmother, I have come to understand, to learn the truth." Alara's laugh was bitter, the sound of broken glass. "The truth. The truth is simple, child. A man wanted what he could not have, so he took it by force. And when I made him pay for his crime, he passed the cost to every generation that followed. Your husband died because of his greed. You suffered because of his arrogance. Every valorous king who choked on his own power did so because one man could not accept the word no." She turned her gaze to Theron, and her eyes blazed with cold fire. "And now you come here, descendant of my rapist, seeking absolution, seeking release from the burden you were born to carry. Tell me, son of Aldrich, why should I grant you anything but death?" Theron did not look away. "I do not seek absolution." His voice was steady. "There is no forgiveness for what my ancestor did, no words that can heal 3 centuries of wrong. I come only to ask if there is a way forward that does not require more suffering." Alara's eyes narrowed. "You think suffering can be avoided? I think enough people have died. Enough lives have been destroyed. If the curse continues, it will consume not just my bloodline, but hers as well. We are connected now, whether we chose it or not. Whatever happens to me will affect her. Whatever affects her will touch me. And that matters to you?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she is not responsible for your pain any more than I am. Because punishing the innocent for the crimes of the guilty is exactly what Aldrich did to you. And continuing that cycle does not honor your sacrifice. It perpetuates his sin." Silence fell over the forest. Alara stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Serafina. "What do you want, daughter of my blood? Do you seek revenge against his line?" Serafina thought carefully before answering. "I wanted revenge. For 3 years, revenge was all I thought about. But revenge will not bring Kaelin back. It will only add more death to a pile that is already too high." "So you forgive them?" "No." Serafina's voice was firm. "I do not forgive Aldrich. I do not forgive Theron's father. What they did was monstrous. But Theron is not them. He has shown me kindness when he could have shown cruelty. He has given me choices when every other man in my life has taken them away." Alara was silent for a long moment. "The curse requires balance," she said finally. "A life for a life. One of you must be willing to die for the other, not in words, in truth. Only then will my spirit be free." She began to fade. "The test will come. You will not know when. And in that moment, you will discover whether your words were truth or merely wishes." Then she was gone. They woke in the moon chamber as dawn broke, lying side by side on the cold stone floor, the moon setting beyond the glass dome. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Theron pushed himself upright. The test will come when we least expect it. We need to be ready. Serafina sat up slowly. How do we prepare for something we cannot predict? We trust each other. She nodded slowly. Then we learn. Theron extended his hand. Serafina took it. Their marks pulsed together, 2 heartbeats becoming one. Then the chamber doors crashed open. General Magnus stood in the entrance, his armor splashed with blood, his scarred face twisted with urgency. Your Majesty, the South has attacked. 20,000 strong, heading straight for the capital. They bypassed Thornwood Pass through the mountain trails. They will be at our gates within hours. Theron was on his feet instantly. Where are our forces? Engaged at the pass. They are holding, but they cannot reach us in time. Theron turned to Serafina. Stay here. No. Her eyes met his. Trust goes both ways. Something shifted in his expression. Stay close to me. Always. They moved through this palace at speed, gathering weapons and armor. Servants pressed against walls to let them pass. Guards fell into formation behind them, their faces grim. The sounds of battle grew louder as they approached the outer walls. Steel clashing against steel, the screams of dying men, the howls of wolves in their shifted forms. Lord Aldrich's forces had moved faster than anyone expected. Somehow they had bypassed the main defenses at Thornwood Pass, appearing at the gates of Blackstone itself, while the bulk of the Northern Army remained engaged miles away. It was a trap, Serafina realized. The entire assault on the pass had been a feint, designed to draw defenders away from the capital. Theron understood this too, but there was no time for recrimination. The enemy was here. The battle was now. Serafina watched Theron transform as they approached the battlefield. Not physically, not yet, but something deeper. The exhausted man from the moon chamber vanished completely, replaced by the Wolf of Winter in full fury. His eyes went cold as mountain ice. His movements became precise, economical, every gesture carrying lethal intent. Power radiated from him in waves that made lesser wolves instinctively lower their heads. He was beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, dangerous and perfect. The first wave of enemies broke against him like water against stone. His sword sang through the air, each strike finding flesh and bone with unerring accuracy. He did not waste motion. He simply killed, one after another, carving a path through the enemy ranks. Serafina fought beside him. She had not held a weapon in 3 years, but her body remembered. Remembered the training Kaelin had given her. Remembered the way a blade felt as an extension of her arm. Remembered that survival was an active choice, moment by moment, breath by breath. She killed her first enemy without thinking. A soldier who tried to flank Theron while his attention was elsewhere. Her sword took him through the throat. The second was harder. A young man, barely more than a boy, who looked at her with wide, terrified eyes in the moment before her blade found his heart. She would remember that face, but she could not afford hesitation. By the 10th kill, she had stopped counting. Blood soaked her dress, her hands, her hair. She was covered in the evidence of violence, changed by it in ways she could not yet understand. The battle raged for hours. Theron's forces pushed back the initial assault, but more enemies kept coming, wave after wave of southern soldiers, throwing themselves against the walls of Blackstone. The palace guards were skilled, but they were outnumbered. For every enemy they killed, 2 more took his place. The sun climbed toward its peak and began to descend. Still the fighting continued. Serafina lost track of Theron in the chaos. One moment he was beside her, his sword dripping with enemy blood. The next he was gone, swallowed by the press of bodies. She fought her way toward him, cutting down anyone who stood in her path. Her arms burned with exhaustion. Her legs trembled. But she kept moving, kept searching for the man she had sworn to stand beside. And then, in a moment of chaos, everything changed. Serafina saw Magnus moving through the battlefield toward Theron, who stood with his back turned, engaged with 3 opponents at once. Something was wrong. Magnus's expression was not that of a man rushing to help his king. It was the expression of a man who had made a decision he could not take back. A man walking towards something terrible with the certainty of someone who had convinced himself it was necessary. She saw the knife in his hand, not his sword, which hung at his hip unused. A knife. A dagger designed for close work, for quiet kills, for putting down wounded animals, or wounded kings. She screamed a warning, but her voice was lost in the chaos of battle, lost in the clash of steel and the screams of dying men and the howling of wolves in their fury. Magnus reached Theron. The king had just dispatched his last opponent, his sword wet with blood, his chest heaving from exertion. He heard Magnus approach and turned, expecting his most trusted general, his oldest friend, the man who had been a second father to him since childhood. He did not expect the knife. The blade plunged into his back, sliding between ribs with the precision of someone who knew exactly where to strike. Deep enough to wound, deep enough to cripple, perhaps deep enough to kill. Theron staggered. His sword fell from nerveless fingers, clattering against the blood-soaked stones. He turned, confusion and betrayal written across his face in lines of pain and disbelief. "Magnus!" His voice was a whisper, barely audible above the sounds of battle. "Why?" Magnus's scarred face was a mask of anguish. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Anguish. The expression of a man who believed he was committing a necessary evil, who had convinced himself that his crime was actually a mercy. "Because I love this kingdom more than I love you." His voice cracked on the words. "Because the curse makes you weak, makes you desperate, makes you willing to bargain with forces you do not understand. Because Aldrich promised me the power to protect what I have given my life to serve. Because I have buried 3 kings already, watched them waste away from the curse, watched them die in agony calling for mothers and lovers and children they would never see again. And I cannot bury a 4th. I cannot watch you die slowly, piece by piece, consumed by a darkness you did nothing to deserve." Theron's legs buckled beneath him. He caught himself on one knee, blood streaming down his back, pooling on the stones around him. "So you chose to kill me quickly instead." "I chose to end the suffering." Magnus's voice was hollow now, the certainty draining from it. "I chose to spare you what I have seen the others endure. You chose to betray everything you claimed to believe in." Theron's voice was fading, but his eyes held Magnus's with unwavering intensity. "You chose power over loyalty, Aldrich's promises over your oath to me. I chose the kingdom. You chose yourself." Theron collapsed forward, his arms giving way beneath him. Blood spread across the stones like a dark tide. Seraphina screamed. The sound tore from her throat with a force that surprised her, raw and primal, the howl of a wolf watching its pack fall. She cut through the soldiers between them, her sword moving with desperate fury. She did not feel the wounds she took, the blades that sliced across her arms and shoulders, the mail that scraped her skin. She felt nothing but the burning need to reach him, to stop the bleeding, to undo what could not be undone. She fell to her knees beside his body, her hands pressing against the wound in his back, trying to stem the flow of blood that poured through her fingers no matter how hard she pressed. "Theron, stay with me." Her voice broke on his name. "Stay with me, do you hear me? You do not get to die. Not now, not like this." His eyes found hers, gray and fading, the storm in them dying to embers, but still alive, still aware. "Run!" The word was barely a whisper. "Get out of here. Find Corvinus. Find a way to break the curse without me." "I am not leaving you." "You must." He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "The curse dies with me. If you survive, if you carry Alara's blood forward, there may still be a chance. Another generation, another try." Seraphina shook her head, tears streaming down her face, mingling with the blood that covered everything. "I did not survive 3 years in a dungeon to run away now. I did not learn to trust again just to abandon the first person who earned it." Something flickered in his fading eyes. Not pain, something softer, something that might have been the beginning of an emotion neither of them had been prepared to name. "Then we die together." Chains closed around her wrists from behind, cold iron biting into her skin. Magnus stood over them, surrounded by southern soldiers in the black and silver of Lord Aldrich's personal guard. His face was pale, haunted, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Take her to Lord Aldrich. She is what he came for, the woman who carries Alara's blood. The key to controlling the curse rather than breaking it." Seraphina fought against the chains, against the hands that gripped her arms, against the soldiers who dragged her backward away from Theron's body. "No, no. You cannot do this. You served him. You loved him. How can you stand there and watch him die?" Magnus did not meet her eyes. "Because some things matter more than love. Because the kingdom must survive, even if its king does not. Because I have made my choice and I will live with its consequences, whatever they may be." They dragged her away. The last thing she saw before they forced her around a corner and out of sight was Theron's body, lying in a pool of his own blood, the mark on his throat flickering once, twice, like a candle flame in the wind, and then going dark. The test had come, and they had both failed. Theron woke in darkness. Pain was the first thing he felt, a fire burning in his back where the blade had entered, spreading through his veins like poison. His lungs screamed for air, his heart stuttered in his chest, struggling to pump blood through a body that had lost too much of it. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. The stone beneath him was cold and wet. He could smell blood, his own blood, mixed with the dust of ancient things and the lingering scent of ritual magic. The moon chamber. Someone had dragged him here while he lay dying on the battlefield. Someone who wanted him to survive, or perhaps someone who simply did not want him to die where others could see. Corvinus. It had to be Corvinus. The old man was the only one who would have thought to bring a dying king to the one place where the curse might keep him breathing long enough for help to arrive. Theron forced his eyes open. Silver light filtered through the glass dome overhead, the moon still visible though dawn was approaching. The runes on the floor pulsed faintly, their rhythm matching the weak flutter of his heart. They were keeping him alive, he realized. The same magic that had connected him to Seraphina, the same power that had shown them visions of the past, was now pouring its ancient strength into his failing body. But it would not last. He could feel the curse pushing back, fighting against the healing magic, trying to claim what it believed was its right. Every Velaris king died young. Every Velaris king died alone. The curse would not be denied its due simply because one man refused to stop breathing. Seraphina. Her name cut through the fog of pain and exhaustion. He reached through the bond that connected them, searching for the pulse of her presence, the warmth that had become familiar over the past days. He found fear, he found anger, he found pain that was not his own. She was alive. That knowledge gave him strength he did not know he possessed. She was alive, and she was suffering. And the men who had taken her would answer for every moment of that suffering with their blood. Theron pushed himself onto his hands and knees. The movement tore something in his back. Fresh blood flowed, hot and thick, soaking through the makeshift bandages someone had wrapped around his torso. He did not care. Pain was familiar. Pain was an old companion who had walked beside him since childhood. He could endure pain. What he could not endure was the thought of Seraphina in the hands of Lord Aldrich. He found his sword lying nearby, placed there by whoever had saved him. His fingers closed around the hilt, drawing strength from its familiar weight. He used it as a crutch, levering himself to his feet, swaying but refusing to fall. The door to the moon chamber stood open. Beyond it, the palace was chaos. He could hear distant sounds of battle still echoing through the corridors. His forces had not surrendered. Even without their king, they fought on, loyal to the death. He felt a surge of pride for them, followed immediately by guilt. They were dying because he had failed to see the betrayal coming. They were dying because he had trusted the wrong man. He would not fail them again. Theron staggered into the corridor, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Each step was agony. Each breath was a battle. But he kept moving, following the bond that connected him to Seraphina, letting it guide him toward wherever they had taken her. The courtyard was a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay everywhere. Northern and southern soldiers tangled together in the embrace of death. The stones were slick with blood that steamed in the cold morning air. Crows had already begun to gather, circling overhead, waiting for the living to depart so they could claim their feast. Theron walked through the carnage without seeing it. His eyes were fixed on the great gates of Blackstone, now hanging open and broken, the path beyond leading toward the southern camps where Lord Aldrich would have established his command. A figure stepped into his path. General Magnus, the man who had been his mentor, his protector, the closest thing to a father he had ever known, the man who had driven a knife into his back and left him to die in a pool of his own blood. Magnus looked almost as bad as Theron felt. His armor was dented and scored by a dozen near misses. Blood matted his gray hair to his skull. His blind eye seemed to weep something that was not tears. "You should be dead." Theron's voice was a rasp, barely recognizable. "So should you." They stood facing each other in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the dead, the living having retreated to give them space. Even in the midst of battle, some things demanded witness. Some confrontations could not be interrupted. "I did not want this," Magnus said. The words seemed to pain him. "I did not want any of this. And yet here we are." Theron raised his sword. The weight of it made his arms tremble, but he kept the blade steady through sheer force of will. "You betrayed everything you claimed to believe in. You sold your honor to a man who will throw you aside the moment you cease to be useful." Magnus's face twisted. "You do not understand. You have never understood. 30 years I served your bloodline. 30 years I watched good men die because of a curse they did nothing to earn. Your father, your grandfather, your great-uncle who never even wanted the throne but had it thrust upon him when his brother died. I have buried them all, Theron. I have held their hands as the curse took them. I have listened to them beg for mercy that never came. His voice cracked. I could not watch it happen again. I could not stand by and witness another valorous king waste away, consumed by a darkness he did not create. Aldrich promised me an end to it. He promised that if the curse could be controlled rather than broken, the suffering would stop. No more dying kings, no more grieving kingdoms, just stability, just peace. Theron stared at him. And you believed him? I wanted to believe something. Anything. After 30 years of watching good men die, I needed to believe there was another way. There is another way. Theron's voice hardened. The woman you handed to Aldrich, she is the key, not to controlling the curse, but to ending it forever. And you gave her to the one man who will do anything to ensure it continues. Magnus's face went pale. What? Seraphina carries the blood of Alara. She is the daughter of the curse, the heir to its breaking. If she and I choose each other freely, if we prove that the cycle of force and violation can end, the curse dies with us. But Aldrich does not want it broken. He has built his entire empire on the certainty that valorous kings die young. He will kill her before he allows her to end that advantage. Magnus staggered backward as if struck. I did not know. You did not ask. You saw an opportunity to stop your own pain, and you took it without considering who else might suffer for your choice. That is not love for the kingdom, Magnus. That is cowardice wearing the mask of sacrifice. Magnus's hand fell to his sword, then dropped away. What would you have me do? Step aside. Let me pass. And when this is over, when Seraphina is safe and Aldrich is defeated, you will face judgment for what you have done. Not death. That would be too easy. You will live with the consequences of your choice. You will watch me build the kingdom you claim to love, and you will know that you nearly destroyed it. Magnus stood motionless for a long moment. Then slowly, he moved aside. Theron walked past him without another word. The path to the southern camp was littered with the debris of war, abandoned weapons, discarded armor, the bodies of men who had fled the battle only to die on the road. Theron walked through it all, his steps growing steadier as the bond pulled him forward, as the certainty of his purpose burned away the weakness of his flesh. He found the camp at the base of the mountain, a sprawling collection of tents and siege equipment surrounding a pavilion of black and silver. Lord Aldrich's personal standard flew above it, snapping in the morning wind like a challenge. Guards moved to intercept him. Theron killed the first one without breaking stride. His sword took the man through the throat, a quick death, merciful by the standards of what was to come. The second guard managed to raise his weapon before Theron's blade found his heart. By the time the third and fourth fell, others were running toward him. By the time the fifth and sixth joined their comrades on the ground, the runners had changed direction, fleeing toward the command pavilion with news that the Wolf of Winter had not died after all. Theron followed them. The pavilion opened at his approach, the flaps pushed aside by a man in ornate armor who stepped out to meet him. Lord Aldrich Thornwood, regent of the Southern Dominion, the man who had waited 25 years for this moment. He was not what Theron had expected. Aldrich was old, older than he appeared in the reports and portraits, his hair gone fully white, his face lined with the weight of decades. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, the eyes of a man who had played the Game of Thrones longer than Theron had been alive. And there was no triumph in those eyes, only a sort of weary resignation. "The curse should have claimed you hours ago," Aldrich said. His voice was cultured, educated, the voice of a man who had spent his life in courts rather than on battlefields. "By all rights, you should be bleeding out in that courtyard with Magnus's blade still in your back. The curse does not own me yet." Aldrich studied him with something that might have been respect. "The fact that you are standing before me now suggests that the bond with the woman is stronger than I calculated. Stronger, perhaps, than anything I have encountered in 50 years of studying these matters. Where is she?" "Safe. For now." Aldrich stepped aside, gesturing toward the interior of the pavilion. "Come, let us talk before we fight. I find that conversation often prevents unnecessary bloodshed." Theron hesitated. It could be a trap. Probably was a trap. But Seraphina was inside that pavilion, and he would walk through fire itself to reach her. He entered. The interior was richly appointed, carpets and tapestries softening the harsh military environment. A table held maps and documents, the plans of a campaign that had been years in the making, and at the far end, bound to a chair with silver chains, sat Seraphina. She looked up at his entrance. Her face was bruised, her dress torn, but her eyes burned with the same defiant fire he had first seen in his throne room. Relief flooded through the bond between them, followed immediately by fear. Fear for him, he realized, not for herself. Theron. He wanted to go to her immediately, to cut her bonds and carry her away from this place. But Aldrich stood between them, and despite his age, the Southern Lord carried himself with the confidence of a man who had survived dozens of assassination attempts and political purges. "You have questions," Aldrich said. "Ask them. We have a few moments before my guards work up the courage to storm in here and try to kill you." "Why?" Theron's voice was flat. "You have everything you wanted. The North is in chaos. My army is shattered. You could simply kill me and claim victory." "I could," Aldrich agreed. "But victory means nothing if I do not understand what I have won." He turned to study Seraphina. "She carries the blood of Alara, the original victim, the source of the curse that has shaped our entire world for 3 centuries. And you want to control it, not end it." Aldrich smiled faintly. "You say that as if control is somehow worse than destruction. Tell me, young king, what happens if the curse ends? What happens to the balance of power that has kept our kingdoms from total war for 300 years? Theron frowned. "There has been no peace. There has been constant war, border skirmishes, raids, the occasional succession crisis, but no true conquest, no empire rising to swallow its neighbors whole. Do you know why? Because every time a Valeris king grows strong enough to threaten the balance, the curse cuts him down. Your bloodline has been the greatest check on tyranny this realm has ever known, precisely because it prevents any of you from living long enough to become tyrants yourselves." Seraphina spoke for the first time. "So we should thank you for our suffering? For 3 centuries of death and grief?" Aldrich turned to her. "I am not asking for gratitude. I am asking for understanding. The curse is terrible, yes, but it has also prevented something worse. If Aldrich Valeris I had lived to old age, if his sons and grandsons had ruled for full lifetimes, do you think they would have been content with one kingdom? The Valeris bloodline carries the ambition of conquerors. The curse is the only thing that has ever checked that ambition." He spread his hands. "I do not want to control the curse for power. I want to control it because the alternative is worse. A Valeris king who lives to see 70, who has decades to build alliances and armies, who produces heir after heir to continue his legacy. That is not a king. That is an emperor waiting to happen. And emperors leave nothing but ashes in their wake." Theron stared at him. For a moment, just a moment, he saw the logic, saw the fear that had driven Aldrich's choices, the genuine belief that he was protecting the realm from something worse than the curse itself. Then he looked at Seraphina, at the chains that bound her, at the bruises on her face, at the fear in her eyes, fear for him rather than herself. And he knew that Aldrich was wrong. "You speak of balance and empire and the greater good." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "But you are holding an innocent woman in chains because of what her blood might mean. You are willing to sacrifice her life to maintain your version of stability. How is that different from what Aldrich Valeris did 300 years ago?" Aldrich's eyes narrowed. "I am not forcing a bond. I am not violating anyone. You are denying her the choice. You are deciding for her what her blood is worth, what her life is worth, what her future should be. That is the same poison in a different bottle. Force or manipulation, the result is the same. Someone suffers so that others can feel safe." Seraphina looked at him with something in her eyes that he could not name. "The curse began because a man believed he had the right to decide another person's fate." Theron continued, "It will only end when we stop repeating that sin. Not by controlling it, not by channeling it, by choosing differently than our ancestors chose." Aldrich shook his head. "Pretty words, but they do not change the practical reality. If I let you walk out of here with her, if you break the curse and live to old age, what guarantee do I have that you will not become exactly what I fear?" "None." The answer surprised even Theron himself. "I can give you no guarantees. I do not know what kind of king I will become in 20 years or 30. I do not know if power will corrupt me or if I will fall prey to the same ambitions that drove my ancestors. All I can tell you is what I choose now, in this moment. And I choose to trust her, to trust that together we can build something better than what came before. Aldrich studied him for a long moment. Then he drew his sword. Very well. If words will not convince you, perhaps steel will. If you can defeat me, old as I am, then perhaps you deserve the future you claim to want. But if you fall here, know that I will use the woman's blood to bind the curse forever, to ensure that no valorous king ever again threatens the balance I have spent my life protecting. Theron raised his own blade. He was wounded, exhausted, half dead from blood loss and the lingering effects of betrayal. Aldrich was old, but fresh, and his eyes held the cunning of a man who had survived in the deadliest game imaginable for longer than Theron had been alive. It did not matter. Some things were worth dying for. They clashed in the center of the pavilion, blades singing against each other, the sound sharp and clear in the morning air. Aldrich was skilled, more skilled than Theron had expected, his movements economical and precise despite his age. He did not waste energy on flourishes or displays. Every strike was intended to kill. This was not the swordplay of tournament champions or parade ground soldiers. This was the fighting style of a man who had survived a lifetime of assassination attempts by being better than everyone who wanted him dead. Theron met him blow for blow. His body screamed with pain, his wounds reopening with every movement, blood seeping through his bandages and dripping onto the expensive carpets beneath their feet. But he pushed through it. Seraphina was watching. The future was watching. He would not fall here. Not when he was so close to everything he had fought for. Not when the woman he had come to save sat mere feet away, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that burned hotter than any fever. They traded strikes across the length of the pavilion, tables overturned, spilling goblets of wine that mixed with their blood on the floor. Maps scattered, the carefully drawn plans of conquest trampled beneath their boots. The artifacts of Aldrich's carefully planned campaign scattered like leaves in a storm, 25 years of preparation reduced to chaos in the span of minutes. Theron caught a glancing blow on his shoulder, the blade biting through leather and cloth to draw a line of fire across his skin. Aldrich took a cut across his ribs in return, grunting with pain but refusing to slow. Both men bled freely now. Both men refused to yield. And then Theron saw his opening. Aldrich overextended on a thrust, his old muscles betraying him for just an instant. Theron sidestepped, brought his blade up in a sweeping arc, and knocked the Southern Lord's sword from his grasp. Aldrich fell backward, landing hard on the carpeted floor. Theron's blade came to rest at his throat. For a moment, neither moved. "Do it." Aldrich's voice was calm. "End me. Prove that you are exactly what I feared." Theron stared down at him, at the old man who had orchestrated so much suffering in the name of stability, at the enemy who genuinely believed he was saving the world. Then he lowered his sword. "No!" Aldrich's eyes widened. "I will not kill you." Theron stepped back. "You will return to the south. You will sign a treaty of peace that will last for 50 years. And you will remember this moment for the rest of your life. You feared what a Valeris king might become with the curse lifted. I am showing you what I choose to become. A man who defeats his enemies and then lets them live. A man who breaks cycles rather than continuing them." Aldrich lay still for a long moment. Then slowly he pushed himself to a sitting position. "You are either the wisest man I have ever met or the most foolish. Perhaps both." Theron turned away from him and crossed to where Seraphina sat bound in her chair. He knelt before her and began working at the chains with fingers that trembled from exhaustion and emotion both. "You came for me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Always." The chains fell away. Seraphina stood slowly, her muscles stiff from hours of confinement. She looked at Theron, at the blood soaking through his clothes, at the pallor of his skin, at the determination that burned in his eyes despite everything, and something inside her broke open. Not weakness, not surrender. Something else, something that had been building since the first moment she saw him on that obsidian throne, something that had grown through every revelation and every trial, something that had become undeniable in the moment she watched Magnus's knife plunge into his back and felt her heart shatter with his. The mark on her chest blazed to life, not the faint pulse of before, not the gentle warmth of their connection. This was fire, pure and white and overwhelming, pouring through her veins like molten silver. She gasped, fell to her knees, her hands pressing against the ground as power she had never known she possessed erupted from deep within her. "Seraphina." Theron reached for her. "What is happening?" She looked up at him, and her eyes were no longer amber. They were silver, pure blazing silver, the color of moonlight concentrated into living flame. "I do not know." Her voice echoed strangely, as if another voice spoke alongside her own. "But I think the curse is waking up." The pavilion shook. Outside, wolves began to howl, a chorus of voices rising from the camp and the battlefield and the distant palace. The sound was primal, ancient, the call of a species acknowledging something profound. The moon, still visible in the morning sky, began to glow red. "Blood moon!" Aldrich scrambled to his feet, his face pale with sudden terror. "The blood moon rises. The curse is manifesting." Seraphina stood. Power flowed through her like nothing she had ever experienced. She could feel the curse now, feel it as a living thing wrapped around the Valeris bloodline, feel its hunger and its rage and its endless, relentless desire for suffering. And she could feel something else. Elara, her ancestor's spirit, bound to the curse she had created, watching through Seraphina's eyes as the moment of truth finally arrived. "Daughter of my blood," Elara's voice whispered through her mind. "The test has come. Are you ready?" Seraphina looked at Theron, at the man who had given her choices when everyone else had taken them away, at the king who had offered his life so she could decide his fate, at the ally who had become something more, something neither of them had expected or asked for. "I am ready." The power surged. Seraphina moved without conscious thought, her body acting on instincts older than memory. She crossed to Theron and pressed her hand against his chest, over his heart, where the wound from Magnus's blade still seeped blood. "What are you doing?" He grabbed her wrist, but he did not push her away. "What I should have done from the beginning." She met his eyes. "Choosing you. Not because the curse demands it, not because prophecy requires it, but because you are the only person who ever made me believe that choice itself was possible." The mark on her chest blazed brighter. The mark on his throat answered. And between them, in the space where their hearts nearly touched, something ancient and terrible began to shift. The curse recognized the moment. It surged against them, desperate to prevent what was happening, desperate to continue the cycle it had followed for 3 centuries. Pain lanced through them both, pain beyond anything they had ever experienced, the accumulated suffering of generations compressed into a single instant. Seraphina screamed, Theron roared, but neither let go. "I choose you." Seraphina gasped through the agony. "I choose to forgive what your bloodline did to mine. I choose to believe that the sins of fathers do not have to become the sins of sons. I choose to end this, here, now, with you." Theron's hands came up to cup her face. "And I choose you." His voice was steady despite the pain. "I choose to honor what was taken from your ancestor by never taking from you. I choose to break the pattern that began with Aldrich Valeris, to build something new on the ashes of something old. I choose life over curse, love over legacy, you over everything." The word hung in the air between them. Love. Neither had said it before. Neither had dared to name what was growing between them. But in this moment, with the curse fighting to tear them apart and the power of 3 centuries of magic burning through their veins, there was no room for denial. Seraphina leaned forward. Their lips met. The world exploded. Light poured from them, silver and gold intertwined, spiraling upward through the tent and into the sky. The blood moon overhead pulsed once, twice, and then began to fade, its crimson glow giving way to pale white. The curse screamed. Seraphina felt it dying, felt the magic that had bound generations of Valeri's kings beginning to unravel, the chain that connected suffering to suffering, death to death, father to son, all of it coming apart like a tapestry whose threads had finally been cut. And in the moment of its death, she felt Elara, not as a voice this time, as a presence, as a woman who had waited 300 years for someone to finish what she had started. "Thank you," Elara whispered. "Thank you for proving that choice is stronger than force, that love is stronger than hatred, that the cycle can end." Then she was gone. The light faded. Seraphina collapsed against Theron's chest, her strength leaving her in a rush. His arms wrapped around her, holding her up when her legs would not support her weight. "The curse," she whispered, "is it gone?" Theron pressed his lips to her hair. "Yes." His voice was rough with emotion he could not hide. "I can feel it, the weight I have carried since childhood, the darkness gnawing at the edges of my mind. It is gone." Seraphina laughed. The sound was weak, exhausted, but genuine. "We did it. We did it together." They stood in the ruins of Aldrich's pavilion, holding each other as the morning sun rose fully over the mountains. Around them, the sounds of battle had ceased. Wolves of both armies emerged from hiding, drawn by the light that had pierced the sky, staring in wonder at the two figures who had somehow survived the impossible. Lord Aldrich watched from where he had fallen, his face a mask of complex emotions. Fear and wonder and something that might have been hope, carefully buried beneath years of cynicism. "The curse is broken." He said the words as if testing them. "After 300 years, it is." Theron looked at him. "And now you have a choice of your own to make. War or peace. Vengeance or cooperation. The future is unwritten, Aldrich. You helped write the past. What will you write now?" Aldrich was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he bowed his head. "Peace." The word seemed to cost him something. "For now, at least. I will withdraw my forces and return to the south. But know this, young king, I will be watching. If you become the tyrant I feared, I will return. And next time, I will not hesitate." Theron nodded. "I would expect nothing less." The days that followed were a blur of activity and recovery. The Southern Army withdrew as promised, marching back through the mountain passes toward their own lands. The wounded were tended, the dead were buried. The damage to Blackstone Palace was assessed and repairs begun. General Magnus was brought before Theron in chains. The man who had betrayed him stood straight despite his bonds, his scarred face showing neither defiance nor submission, only acceptance of whatever judgment was to come. Theron studied him for a long moment. "You could have killed me." His voice was quiet. "The blade was in my back. A few inches to the left and it would have found my heart." Magnus met his eyes. "I could not do it. Even believing I was right, even convinced that your death would save the kingdom, I could not make myself aim for the kill." "Why?" "Because despite everything, you are still the boy I trained, the prince I watched grow into a king, the closest thing to a son I will ever have." Theron stood. "Then you will live with that." He turned to the guards. "Strip him of his rank and honors. Send him to the eastern border, to the watchtower at Grimhold. He will serve there as a common soldier for the rest of his days." Magnus's face showed surprise. "Not death?" "Death would end your suffering. I want you to live long enough to see that I never become what you feared. I want you to watch me build the kingdom you claim to love, and know that you nearly destroyed it with your fear and your lack of faith." Magnus bowed his head. "Take him away." The guards led Magnus from the throne room. Theron watched him go, feeling the weight of the moment, the finality of a relationship that had shaped his entire life coming to its end. Seraphina stepped up beside him. That was mercy. That was justice. Theron did not look at her. Killing him would have been easy. Making him live with what he did is harder, for both of us. She slipped her hand into his. He did not pull away. The coronation took place a month later, after the wounds had healed, and the kingdom had begun the slow process of rebuilding what war had destroyed. The weeks between the breaking of the curse and the ceremony had been filled with work that seemed endless. Bodies to bury, families to comfort, damaged walls to repair, treaties to negotiate with the retreating Southern forces. Every day brought new challenges, new decisions, new reminders of how much had been lost and how much remained to be done. But there had been moments of peace as well. Quiet evenings in the royal library where Seraphina devoured books on governance and history, determined to understand the kingdom she had unexpectedly become responsible for. Long walks through the palace gardens where she and Theron spoke of their pasts, their hopes, the future they were beginning to believe might actually exist. They had not shared a bed, had barely shared more than brief touches and occasional kisses stolen in empty corridors. There was too much to do, too much to process, too much weight still pressing down on both of them. But the connection between them deepened with each passing day, the bond that the curse had forged becoming something stronger, something chosen rather than imposed. The coronation itself was not the grand affair that previous valorous coronations had been. No armies paraded through the streets in displays of military might. No foreign dignitaries competed for attention and influence. No elaborate feasts stretched through days of revelry. Just a simple ceremony in the moon chamber, witnessed by those who had survived the battle and the curse together. Soldiers who had fought at the gates of Blackstone, servants who had tended the wounded through long nights, lords and ladies who had chosen loyalty over safety when the Southern Army came. all of them gathered in the silver light, watching as history was made. Elder Corvinus presided, his ancient voice carrying through the chamber as he spoke words that had been spoken for 300 years. The same words, the same ritual, the same prayers to the moon goddess who had watched over the Valaris bloodline since its beginning. But the meaning was different now. The weight was different. For the first time, these words did not carry the shadow of a curse waiting to claim its due. But when he placed the crown on Theron's head, there was no weight to it, no sense of doom descending. For the first time in 3 centuries, a Valaris king took his throne without the curse whispering promises of early death in his ear. Theron turned to Seraphina. She wore a dress of silver and white, her hair braided with moonflowers, the mark on her chest visible but no longer glowing. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with magic or prophecy. Beautiful because of who she was, because of what she had survived, because of what she had chosen. He held out his hand. She took it. Together they faced the gathered witnesses. "I present to you Seraphina Valaris," Theron's voice carried through the chamber. "My queen, my partner, the woman who broke the curse that enslaved my bloodline and freed us all." The assembled wolves bowed. Seraphina did not bow. She stood beside him, equal in every way, her hand in his, their marks pulsing faintly in synchrony. Later, when the ceremony was finished and the guests had departed, they stood together on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Seraphina asked. "Now we rebuild." Theron's arm wrapped around her waist. "We create the future we fought for. We prove that the curse's end was a beginning, not just an ending." She leaned against him. "I never wanted to be a queen. I never wanted to be a king." Theron laughed softly. "But here we are. Sometimes the roles we are born to and the roles we choose become the same thing." She was silent for a moment. "Do you think we will be good at it?" "I think we will make mistakes. I think we will argue and struggle and sometimes fail. But I also think that we will face all of it together, and that makes all the difference." Seraphina turned to look at him. "You never said it." She spoke quietly. "That word. In the pavilion, when we broke the curse, you said love, but you have never said it to me directly." Theron met her eyes. "I love you, Seraphina." The words came easily now, freed from the weight of curse and caution. "I did not plan to. I did not expect to. But somewhere between the dungeon and the throne room, between the moon chamber and the battlefield, you became the one thing I would not give up, even for my kingdom, even for my life." Seraphina's eyes glistened. "I love you too." She said it like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. He pulled her close. Their lips met beneath the first light of the stars, and for a moment the world was perfect. The moon rose, pale and silver, free of the red taint that had marked it for so long. And somewhere in the distant mountains, something ancient stirred in its sleep. The curse was broken. But magic of that magnitude does not simply disappear. It goes somewhere. It waits. The Blood Moon Covenant had ended. But every ending is also a beginning. And the dawn that followed was only the first light of a much longer story yet to come.